the lowest city in the world. Remember that this coming Friday, on our way to the Alamy Bridge, we will visit Jericho. So in the meantime, we're taking the Jericho bypass road. But remember, on Wednesday, we will visit this city. Jericho, ladies and gentlemen, is considered as the lowest city in the world because right now we are exactly 1,100 feet below sea level. Jericho is also considered as the oldest city in the world because, according to the excavations, we learn that the first city of Jericho was established here by the Canaanites in the year 8000 before Christian's era, which means that Jericho is 10,000 years old. Now, since until today, in other parts of the world, or other parts of this country, archaeologists did not succeed to find even one city that was built before the year 8000 BC. This is why the stereotype that was given to Jericho is the oldest city in the world. Jericho, ladies and gentlemen, is 2 miles from the river Jordan. As we said, and I repeat, the river is 2 more miles east from here, and Jericho, ladies and gentlemen, is 5 miles north of the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is 5 more miles south from here. Now, take a look to your right-hand side. You see the Jericho is a beautiful green oasis. You see lots of green trees and a lot of greenery. The reason for this beautiful oasis is fresh water. In the center of Jericho, there is a big spring named after Elisha. During the time of the Bible and still nowadays, the spring provided and still continues to provide a lot of fresh, soft, sweet drinking water. So thanks to a lot of fresh water that come from the spring, this is why Jericho is a beautiful oasis. The very first time, ladies and gentlemen, that Jericho is mentioned in the Bible, this is 3,200 years ago, during the time of the Exodus. The Bible tells us that after the Israelites spent 40 years of Exodus in Sinai under the leadership of Moses, Moses brought the Israelites to this region and he gathered them on the area that you see to your left-hand side. And then the Bible tells us how God took Moses to the top of Mount Nebo. One of the highest mountains to your left is Mount Nebo. The Bible tells us how from Mount Nebo Moses saw the valley of Jericho. So this is the very first time that Jericho is mentioned in the Bible. The Bible tells us that from the mountain Moses also saw all of the promised land, but he didn't have the privilege to enter with the Israelites into the promised land. The Bible tells us that Moses died and was buried on the top of Mount Nebo. Now, the Bible says that after the death of Moses, Joshua became to be the next new leader. When Joshua looked to the west, he saw the beautiful city of Jericho, and he wanted to capture Jericho. But Joshua was a very good chief commander. The Bible tells us that before Joshua attacked the city, first of all he needed information. This is why he sent the spies to Jericho. In Jericho they went into the house of a prostitute by the name of Rahab, and when they returned back, the information that they brought was that the Canaanites here in Jericho were terrified from the Israelites. And then the Bible tells us how Joshua led the Israelites into the river Jordan. Ladies and gentlemen, in the junction that you see straight ahead, if we turn left, you see the road goes all the way to the river Jordan, to the place called Gilgal. Gilgal, to your left, this is where Joshua and the Israelites crossed the river Jordan, and from the river Jordan they continued their way to Jericho. The Bible tells us how for 6 days Joshua and the Israelites surrounded the walls of Jericho, and on the 7th day, when they blew their trumpet, miracle happened. The Bible tells us how the walls of Jericho collapsed. Joshua and the Israelites entered Jericho, they captured Jericho, and then they destroyed Jericho by fire. Remember that Jericho was the first city that Joshua and the Israelites captured when they returned back home. Remember that this Jericho, 3,200 years ago, for Joshua and for the Israelites, was the main gate, the main door, the main entrance back home, back into the promised land. And after they captured Jericho, from here the Bible tells us how Joshua and the Israelites continued their journey to the inside of the country. They fought against the Canaanites who lived here, and eventually they succeeded to take this land from their hands. And then the Bible tells us how Joshua divided the lands of this country among the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, the Bible tells us that during the time of the first temple, some of the Israelites returned back here, and over the remains of the Canaanite city, they established the new Israelite city, also called Jericho. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, that in the Old Testament, there are few important stories that refer to Old Testament Jericho. One of the stories is about Prophet Elijah. The Bible tells us how in the end of his ministry, halfway between Jericho to the river Jordan, this is from where Prophet Elijah was taken up into the sky, into the heaven, with the chariots and the horses of fire. And there is another story about Elisha. The Bible tells us that in Jericho there was a spring of fresh drinking water. But in some stage the people in Jericho complained that the water became to be too salty. So the Bible tells us about Elisha, who came here. He took a bowl full of salt, and when he poured the salt into the spring, the water became to be sweet. This is why since then they began to name the spring after him. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, that during the time of Jesus, the time of the second temple, Jericho was a small but very important Israelite city. Remember that during the time of Jesus, the main road, Galilee, Jerusalem, went via Jericho. So when pilgrims wanted to make their journey from Galilee to Jerusalem, they had to go from Galilee south, all the way along the Jordan Valley to Jericho, and from Jericho the road continued west uphill all the way to Jerusalem. The New Testament tells us that when Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem, when he approached Jericho, not far away from here, he healed the blind beggar. And after that, the New Testament tells us the story with Zacchaeus. Remember, the New Testament tells us that Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but being a short man, he could not because of the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree, since Jesus was passing that way.